She told you not to read between the lines, and then she wrote every single line about herself. That is where we are starting today. Because Woman Down, Colleen Hoover's first novel in 3 years, is one of the most fascinating, frustrating, and genuinely uncomfortable reading experiences I have had in a long time. Not because it is a bad book, not because it is a great one, but because of what it is doing underneath the story, what it is actually saying. And why Colleen Hoover felt she needed to say it this way, wrapped in fiction, hidden behind a character she insists is not her, in a book she released the day after her second-to-last radiation session for cancer. This book is a lot of things: a thriller, a romance, a mystery.
But more than any of those, it is a statement. And today, we are going to take that statement apart, examine every layer of it, and ask the question that nobody in the book community seems willing to ask directly. When an author writes a novel that mirrors her own life almost exactly, then tells you not to draw comparisons, what is she actually asking you to do? Before we get into it, if you are watching this channel for the first time, this is What Authors Hide. This is the channel where we do not just review books, we go inside them. We look at what the author is doing beneath the plot, beneath the characters, beneath the prose, and we ask why. Every week, without pulling punches. If that is the kind of literary conversation you have been looking for, subscribe right now. Hit the bell. Because this community reads differently than everyone else, and once you are in it, you will not want to miss a single week. Subscribe now. Then let us get into this book, because it deserves every minute we are about to give it. Let me start with context, because you cannot understand Woman Down without understanding the 3 years that preceded it. Colleen Hoover was, by almost any metric, the most commercially successful romance author in the world by 2022. She had done something no author in recent memory had managed. She had turned Book Talk into a personal marketing engine so powerful that she was outselling authors like James Patterson and Dr. Seuss combined. Her fans called themselves coho readers. They had merch. They had community. They had the kind of devotion that publishers spend entire careers trying to manufacture and almost never successfully do. And then came the It Ends With Us film adaptation, and everything got complicated. The behind-the-scenes conflict between Blake Lively and Justin Baldoni, the film's star and director, became one of the most publicized Hollywood disputes in years. Lawsuits were filed. Text messages were leaked. The entire machine of the production became a public spectacle. And caught in the middle of all of it was Colleen Hoover, the author whose book started everything, whose name was on every press release, and who was simultaneously being pulled apart online by readers who felt the film's promotional tone was dangerously flippant about a story centered on domestic violence. She went quiet. 3 years of quiet. And during that silence, she was also diagnosed with cancer, underwent surgery and radiation, and by her own account lost the ability to write, not from lack of ideas, but from something deeper, from fear. She told Texas Monthly, "Before, release days were kind of fun because she felt like she was writing for the people who loved her books. But now it felt like she was writing for the people just waiting to put out the negative video." That is the woman who wrote Woman Down. That is the emotional state from which this book was born. And once you know that, every single page reads differently. Now let me tell you what the book actually is before we go deeper into what it means. Woman Down follows Petra Rose. Petra is a best-selling novelist. She writes across multiple genres, started as a hobby writer, became famous faster than she expected, earned more money than she ever imagined, and then watched her career implode after a controversial film adaptation of one of her novels generated public backlash. Leaked communications suggested she had approved a change to the adaptation that her fans hated. The internet turned on her. She lost her income, nearly lost her home, and completely lost her ability to write. Desperate, she retreats to a secluded lakeside cabin to try to finish her next novel, a thriller about a dangerous magnetic detective. And then, At 5 in the morning, a real detective named Nathaniel Saint knocks on her door to investigate a neighborhood incident. He is magnetic. He is dangerous. He is, and this is not subtle, almost exactly like the character she has been trying to write. What follows is a thriller built around their relationship. An affair, a slow reveal of who Saint actually is and why he is really there. Twists, suspense, and running underneath all of it, a sustained meditation on what it feels like to be an author whose audience has become something to fear. Hoover opens the book with an author's note, and this author's note is the most important 200 words in the entire reading experience. She writes, "Please, I beg of you, do not try to make ties between my personal life and this story, as there are none." I want to stay with that sentence for a moment, because that sentence is doing something very specific. It is not just a disclaimer, it is a dare. When an author opens a novel that so transparently parallels her own experience by begging you not to draw the comparison, she has made it impossible for you to think about anything else. Whether that is intentional or not, the effect is the same. Every page you read through the lens of, is this her? Is this what she actually felt? Is this what she actually believes? And the answer, across almost every significant emotional beat of this novel, is almost certainly yes. The parallels are not subtle. Petra is a multi-genre novelist who started writing as a hobby. Hoover is a multi-genre novelist who started writing as a hobby. Petra gets famous faster than she expected. Hoover got famous faster than almost any author in living memory. Petra's career is derailed by a film adaptation that generates public controversy after leaked communications suggest she approved something her audience hated. Hoover's career was derailed by a film adaptation that generated public controversy after communications, including text messages, became part of a very public legal dispute. Now here is where it gets genuinely interesting from a craft perspective, because there is a difference between an author drawing from personal experience and an author using fiction to argue a case. And Woman Down is, underneath everything, an argument. A very specific argument about what happens to public figures, specifically female authors, when the internet decides they deserve punishment. The version of events that Woman Down presents is one in which Petra is not guilty of the thing she is accused of. The leaked communications are misread, the context is stripped away, the nuance is flattened, and the result is a pile-on that destroys someone who was, at worst, imperfect, and at best, completely innocent of the specific charge leveled at her. The internet, in Petra's story, gets it wrong, catastrophically wrong, and Petra pays for that wrongness with her career, her income, her sense of self, and her ability to create. This is Hoover making an argument through fiction that she has not made directly in public. She is saying, through Petra, that what happened to her was a misreading, that the pile-on was based on incomplete information, that the people who came for her were working without the full picture, and she is doing it in a way that gives her plausible deniability because it is fiction, because Petra is not her, because she begged you not to draw the comparison. That is sophisticated. Whether you agree with the argument or not, the decision to make it this way is genuinely sophisticated, and it is the thing that makes this book worth taking seriously even when its flaws as a thriller are significant. Let me talk about those flaws honestly, because this is a review, not a defense. The prose in Woman Down is functional. It does what it needs to do. It moves. It keeps pages turning, but it does not sing. Descriptive imagery is sparse. Characters are often told to us rather than shown. We are informed about their nuances rather than allowed to discover them through behavior. And Saint, the male lead, presents a problem that Hoover's work has wrestled with across her entire bibliography. Saint crosses Petra's boundaries repeatedly throughout this novel. He stands outside her window and watches her sleep. He drives to her daughter's birthday party and broods in the parking lot without being invited. He breaks into her home and stages what begins as a mock kidnapping. And Petra, again and again, forgives him, reframes his behavior, finds the emotional logic that explains it away and makes it acceptable. Sound familiar? This is the same dynamic that made It Ends With Us controversial. Ryle was violent. Lily stayed, loved him, found the context that made it survivable until she finally left. And Hoover's defense of that novel, that it was about the complexity of leaving, about how abuse does not announce itself cleanly, is a legitimate defense. It reflects a genuine truth about how domestic violence operates. But the defense only holds if the text actually engages with that complexity rather than simply aestheticizing the behavior. In Woman Down, Saint's controlling behavior is framed primarily as passion, as obsession that comes from caring too much. The book asks you to find it romantic rather than alarming. And for readers who have spent years arguing that Hoover's work romanticizes red flags rather than examining them, this book will not change that argument. It will deepen it. But here is the nuance that most reviews are missing. The fact that Saint's behavior is framed romantically is not necessarily a failure of awareness on Hoover's part. It may be an intentional reflection of Petra's psychological state. Petra is a woman whose sense of self has been completely dismantled by public humiliation. She has lost her professional identity, her financial security, her creative voice. Saint arrives and makes her feel chosen, seen, creatively alive again. Of course, she is going to reframe his intensity as devotion rather than danger. That is what people in her emotional state do. The question is whether the text is aware of that, whether it is offering Petra's perspective while quietly asking the reader to interrogate it, or whether it genuinely endorses what Petra endorses. And honestly, the book is ambiguous on that point in a way that will frustrate some readers and fascinate others. The thriller mechanics work better than many critics have acknowledged. The slow reveal of who Saint really is and why he actually came to the cabin generates genuine tension. The twist, when it arrives, is not the one you expect, and Hoover earns that. The pacing in the second half tightens considerably. As a thriller, it is not Gillian Flynn. It is not Tana French. But it is a genuine attempt at the genre, and for readers who approach it as such rather than as a return to coho romance, there is more craft here than the one-star reviews suggest. But the conversation that this book has generated, the one that has made it the most discussed release of early 2026, is not really about the thriller mechanics or even the romantic relationship. It is about the author's note. It is about the argument beneath the fiction. It is about whether Colleen Hoover is using this novel to rehabilitate her own narrative, and whether that is something we are allowed to hold against her as readers. Here is my honest answer to that question. Every author does this. Every single one. Every novel is, in some fundamental way, an argument the author needs to make, a wound they are trying to examine, a version of events they need to put on paper to understand or survive. The difference with Hoover is one of scale. When most authors work through personal experience in fiction, it is private. It is intimate. It reaches its audience quietly. When Hoover does it, it becomes a cultural event, because she is one of the most widely read authors on the planet. The processing becomes public by default, and that changes the ethical texture of what she is doing, even if the creative impulse behind it is completely human and completely understandable. What makes Woman Down genuinely interesting as a cultural object and genuinely uncomfortable as a reading experience is that it is not cynical. That is what I keep coming back to. This does not feel like a calculated PR move dressed up as a novel. It feels like a person who has been in tremendous pain, professionally, personally, medically, trying to write her way out of it. Trying to find, through Petra, a version of events in which the person who got knocked down gets back up, gets to create again, gets to be seen as something other than a scandal. That is a very human thing to need. And the fact that Hoover needed to wrap it in a thriller, disguise it with a fictional name, and preface it with a plea not to look too closely, that tells you everything about the psychological position she was writing from. Not from certainty and defiance, from vulnerability, from a writer who was not sure she still had the right to tell her own story directly, so she told it sideways. That is the most interesting thing about this book. More interesting than the plot. More interesting than Saint. More interesting than any of the thriller mechanics. The author's note is the most honest sentence in the entire book, not because it tells the truth about the parallels, but because of what it reveals about the fear behind them. So where does that leave us as readers? If you come to Woman Down as a Coho fan who has been waiting 3 years, you will likely love it. It delivers the emotional intensity, the magnetic male lead, the compulsive readability that defines her work. The thriller elements add something genuinely new to her range. If you come as a critic of her work, if you have spent the last few years arguing that her books romanticize controlling relationships, or that her public conduct during the It Ends With Us press tour was tone-deaf, this book will not convert you. It will give you more material. And if you come as someone genuinely interested in what this book is doing as a piece of literary self-examination, as a public figure's attempt to process public humiliation through the only medium she has, it is fascinating, imperfect, messy, occasionally frustrating, but fascinating. The most interesting authors are rarely the cleanest ones. Hoover has never been clean. She has been raw, commercial, emotionally relentless, and wildly uneven. And Woman Down, in every way that matters, is all of those things at once. She told you not to read between the lines, but she wrote every single line to be read that way. And the fact that you cannot stop. The fact that this book makes you feel like a detective in your own right, piecing together the real story underneath the fictional one, is the thing she is best at. Always has been. Making you feel like you are getting access to something private, something true, something the author is not sure she was supposed to share. Whether that access is real or constructed, that is the question Woman Down refuses to answer. And that refusal is the most honest thing about it. This has been What Authors Hide, and this is exactly the kind of conversation we have every single week on this channel. We do not just summarize plot. We do not tell you whether a book is good or bad in a paragraph and move on. We go inside the work. We ask what the author is actually doing. We take books seriously as the complex, layered, intentional things that the best of them are, even when they are also commercially imperfect. If that is what you have been looking for, a community of readers who read with their whole minds, not just their entertainment instinct, then you are home. Subscribe to What Authors Hide right now. Hit the bell so you never miss a video, because next week we are going inside another book that is generating exactly this kind of conversation, one where the author's real life and the fiction have become almost impossible to separate. If Woman Down interested you, next week is going to hit differently. I will see you there.